The man who ruthlessly slaughtered the entire traditional leadership of Egypt in a single, blood-soaked afternoon, is the very same figure revered today. He is celebrated for constructing the foundations of the modern state out of absolute chaos. Mohamed Ali Pasha was not merely another traditional governor passing through history. He was a calculating, living state project draped in authoritarian robes. When we look at his complex legacy today, we must ask ourselves, was he a national hero, or was he simply a brilliant, merciless chief executive officer? His story begins far from the gilded palaces of Istanbul, in the rough, stone-built coastal town of Kavala in Macedonia, around the year 1769, a time when the old empires were beginning to creak loudly. He was born into a relatively simple family structure with absolutely no significant political lineage to speak of, and certainly no access to the type of formal, elite education reserved for future statesmen. Tragedy struck early when he lost his father at a tender age, a pivotal event that forced him to develop a highly practical, survival-oriented mind rather than relying on emotional dependencies. The crucial message from these early years is clear. He possessed absolutely no inherited financial capital, yet he possessed an innately shrewd commercial intellect that manifested very early on. Growing up in a busy port town exposed him to the raw mechanics of trade and the diverse realities of different cultures long before he ever held a musket or commanded troops in battle. He learned the difficult art of survival not in a royal court, but in the unforgiving streets where wit and quick thinking were far more valuable currency than ancient family names. This was a man shaped by the periphery of the empire, far removed from the central power struggles, which gave him a unique, detached perspective that would later prove invaluable. The absence of a traditional safety net meant that every decision he made carried significant weight, fostering a temperament that was cautious, calculating, and incredibly opportunistic. History often forgets that some of its greatest disruptors come not from the center, but from the forgotten margins where ambition is forged in the fires of necessity. Before Egypt ever became a glimmer in his eye, Kavala had already taught Muhammad Ali that the world owes you nothing, and everything must be earned or taken. Before he ever donned the uniform of a soldier, Muhammad Ali immersed himself deeply in the competitive world of the tobacco trade, a crucial period that shaped his entire worldview. It was in the marketplaces, not the barracks, where he truly mastered the essential skills of complex accounting, intense negotiation, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to read human motivation. His very first real contact with genuine power came not through the sword, but through the accumulation of money and understanding the leverage it provided over others. This commercial background planted a revolutionary idea in his mind, that the coming ruler needed to be something far more complex than just another traditional military strongman. He understood early on that logistics, supply chains, and financial stability were the invisible backbone of any successful enterprise, whether it was selling tobacco or running a country. Dealing with diverse suppliers and customers taught him the necessity of adaptability and the dangers of rigid thinking in a world that was constantly shifting and changing. The merchant mindset dictates that every action must have a calculated return on investment, a philosophy he would later apply ruthlessly to the governance of Egypt. He learned to identify weakness in competitors and leverage in deals, skills that transfer alarmingly well from the souk to high-stakes political maneuvering. We must recognize that his approach to power was inherently transactional. He viewed alliances and enmities through the cold, hard lens of profit and loss. The soldier who arrived in Egypt was already a seasoned businessman, viewing the chaotic province not just as a battlefield, but as a massive, mismanaged asset waiting to be acquired. The sudden and disruptive French campaign led by Napoleon Bonaparte created a massive power vacuum in Egypt, shattering centuries of established order and leaving the door wide open. Mohamed Ali arrived on Egyptian soil not as a conqueror, but as a second-in-command officer within an Albanian contingent sent by the Ottoman Empire to repel the French. To his calculating merchant eyes, Egypt did not look like a functioning province. It looked like a massive, immensely wealthy marketplace that completely lacked effective management. Where others saw only hopeless political anarchy and endless military conflict, Mohamed Ali distinctly smelled the undeniable scent of a once-in-a-lifetime historical opportunity. The land was rich in resources and potential, but it was being bled dry by competing factions who had no interest in long-term stability or development. He quickly realized that the distant Ottoman Sultan had little real control over events on the ground, making Egypt practically ripe for the taking by anyone bold enough. His arrival was relatively unnoticed by the major players of the time, allowing him to observe the fractured political landscape without immediately painting a target on his own back. This was the moment the tobacco merchant from Kavala began to metamorphose into a political operator, seeing the chaos not as a problem, but as his primary tool. The chaos was his ladder, and he was prepared to climb it by utilizing the very instability that paralyzed everyone else around him. He understood that in such a volatile environment, the first person to impose order, any kind of order, would hold the keys to the entire kingdom. The political landscape was a deadly four-way struggle for dominance involving the entrenched Mamluks, the distant Ottoman rulers, the influential religious scholars, and the exhausted Egyptian populace. Instead of directly confronting these powerful groups head-on, which would have been suicide, Mohamed Ali chose to master the art of maneuvering between them. He brilliantly positioned himself as the only stabilizing force, often pitting his enemies against each other while he remained the seemingly neutral arbiter in the middle. Crucially, he worked hard to gain the trust of the native Egyptian population and their leaders, particularly the influential scholar Umar Makram, presenting himself as their protector. This strategic alliance with the people was a masterstroke, as it gave him a legitimacy that neither the foreign Mamluks nor the distant Ottomans possessed. This was not the behavior of a typical warlord. This was the sophisticated, calculating thinking of a CEO managing a hostile takeover in a volatile market. He knew that to eventually rule alone, he first had to appear as the humble servant of the public good, biding his time until the moment was right. By constantly shifting his allegiances based on immediate needs, he ensured that no single faction could become strong enough to eliminate him completely. It was a dangerous game of political tightrope walking, where a single misstep could have meant instant death at the hands of any of his temporary partners. He used the Mamluks to weaken the Ottomans, used the people to pressure the Mamluks, and eventually used his own growing power to dominate them all. The culmination of his maneuvering came in 1805, when popular anger against the abusive Ottoman governor reached a boiling point, creating a revolutionary moment. In an unprecedented historical event, the religious scholars and leaders of the Egyptian people formally decided to depose the Ottoman representative and appoint their own choice. Muhammad Ali was appointed as the new wali of Egypt by the direct will of the people, a move that forced the Ottoman Sultan to eventually recognize him. This was historically significant because it was perhaps the first time in modern regional history that the street had effectively chosen its own ruler. However, for the cunning Muhammad Ali, this popular mandate was merely a useful cover, a necessary stepping stone to achieve absolute, unquestioned personal power. He had used the ladder of popular support to climb the citadel walls, but he had absolutely no intention of sharing power with those who helped him get there. The people believed they had installed a champion of their rights, unaware they had just handed the reins of power to a future autocrat. This appointment was the moment the merchant officially became the monarch, though he would spend the next few years consolidating that reality on the ground. The honeymoon period with the Egyptian populace would be short-lived once his true agenda of centralization and control began to manifest itself. It was a brilliant coup, achieving power through apparent consensus, while inwardly preparing for the inevitable conflict with his former allies. Although he was officially the governor, Muhammad Ali knew that real power on the ground was still largely held by the entrenched military feudal lords known as the Mamluks. The Mamluks were not just irritating rivals. They were strategic competitors who had ruled Egypt for centuries and viewed Muhammad Ali as a temporary upstart. He understood with crystal clarity that as long as the Mamluks existed as a cohesive military force, his own rule would be under a permanent and existential threat. There could be no partnership, no power-sharing agreement with a warrior caste that despised him and was constantly plotting his downfall whenever his back was turned. And so, he began the meticulous, cold-blooded planning for their final and complete elimination from the political and physical landscape of Egypt. He engaged in a prolonged campaign of deception, lulling them into a false sense of security with truces, gifts, and promises of future cooperation. This period was the eerie, deceptive calm before the inevitable storm, a time when smiles hid daggers and alliances were merely temporary conveniences. He knew that modernizing Egypt was impossible while this medieval feudal structure remained in place, acting as a parasite on the state's resources. The decision was not emotional but purely surgical. The Mamluks were a cancerous tumor on the body politic that needed to be excised completely. Muhammad Ali realized that in the Game of Thrones he was playing, you either win decisively or you die, and he had no intention of dying. The plan culminated in March 1811, with a formal invitation sent to all senior Mamluk leaders to attend a celebratory feast at the Cairo Citadel. It was the perfect, meticulously designed trap, luring the entire leadership of his greatest rivals into a confined space from which there would be absolutely no escape. As the Mamluks rode down the narrow, winding passage to leave the citadel after the feast, the gates were suddenly locked, sealing their fate. Muhammad Ali's Albanian soldiers, positioned on the high walls above, opened fire mercilessly on the trapped horsemen in the kill zone below. In a single, horrifying afternoon, a ruling class that had dominated Egypt for centuries was violently and completely wiped out of existence. Was it a brutal, horrific decision that stains his legacy with blood? Yes, undeniably, and it remains one of the most controversial acts in Egyptian history. Yet, from a purely pragmatic perspective, it permanently ended the centuries-old cycle of internal chaos and feudal warfare that had paralyzed Egypt. It was this supreme act of violence that cleared the ground for the construction of a centralized, modern state monopoly on power. Mohamed Ali watched the massacre from a distance, ensuring the grim task was completed before turning his attention to building the future on their graves. From this point forward, there was only one authority in Egypt, and his word was absolute law, backed by undeniable, terrifying force. With internal rivals eliminated, Mohamed Ali realized that his power and Egypt's future depended entirely on building a modern, powerful military machine. He abandoned the outdated, unruly traditional militias and began constructing a disciplined army modeled directly on the latest European standards and tactics. He introduced the revolutionary and deeply unpopular concept of conscription, forcing native Egyptian peasants into military service for the very first time in centuries. To train this new force, he hired foreign military experts, particularly French officers left jobless after the Napoleonic Wars, to instill discipline and modern techniques. The goal was to fundamentally transform the military from a loose collection of loyal tribes and mercenaries into a professional, national institution. He actively worked to separate the army from traditional tribal loyalties, ensuring its only allegiance was to the central state and primarily to himself. This new army became the engine of modernization, driving demand for everything from textiles for uniforms to iron for weapons. It was a brutal process of forced modernization, tearing peasants from their land and turning them into cogs in a vast military machine. Mohamed Ali understood that in the modern world, sovereignty was impossible without a military force capable of deterring European powers and the Ottomans alike. The army was not just for defense. It was the primary tool for his ambitious plans of regional expansion and empire building that would soon follow. Mohamed Ali realized a profound truth early on, that modern weaponry and factories were essentially useless scrap metal without the knowledge to operate and maintain them. He embarked on an ambitious program of sending educational missions to Europe, particularly France, to acquire the scientific and technical knowledge the country desperately lacked. Figures like Rifa al-Tatawi went as imams, but returned as cultural translators, bridging the immense intellectual gap between the East and the West. Back in Egypt, he established a network of specialized schools focused on practical disciplines like medicine, engineering, languages, and military administration. These institutions were not meant to create free thinkers or philosophers, but to produce a competent class of technocrats to run the state machine. He understood that knowledge was a form of power, and he intended to import it just as he imported guns and machinery. The medical school at Abu Zabal, for instance, was created primarily to ensure the health of his valuable army, not out of pure humanitarian concern. This investment in human capital was perhaps his most enduring legacy, creating an educated elite that would shape Egyptian culture for generations. However, education was strictly controlled. He wanted obedient engineers and doctors, not citizens questioning the nature of his authoritarian rule. It was modernization from above, a forced march into the future where the state dictated what was worth learning and who was allowed to learn it. To fund his massive military and educational projects, Mohamed Ali transformed the entire Egyptian economy into a gigantic state-run monopoly. He revolutionized agriculture by introducing long staple cotton, which quickly became Egypt's white gold and its primary connection to the global market. The state dictated what farmers grew, bought their entire harvest at fixed low prices, and sold it abroad at high market rates, keeping the immense profit. He established a wide range of state-owned factories to produce textiles, weaponry, and even ships, attempting to make Egypt self-sufficient. In this system, the state was the only investor, the only major merchant, and the ultimate employer, crushing private enterprise in favor of central control. This command economy generated enormous wealth for the government, allowing for rapid infrastructure development and military expansion on an unprecedented scale. However, this rapid growth came at a horrific social price, with peasants treated little better than serfs on their own land to feed the state machine. The entire country was effectively run like a vast private plantation, with Mohamed Ali as its undisputed and demanding landlord. He proved that a state could achieve rapid industrialization through sheer force of will, but the foundations were built on coercion rather than innovation. It was a brilliant, ruthless economic model that maximized revenue for the ruler while keeping the population at a subsistence level. With his new army and booming economy, Mohamed Ali began to look beyond Egypt's borders, acting more like an independent emperor than an Ottoman governor. At the request of the Sultan, his armies first moved into the Arabian Peninsula to crush the Wahhabi movement, securing the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. He then turned his attention south, invading the Sudan seeking gold and slaves for his army, incorporating vast territories into his growing domain. His most ambitious and dangerous move was the invasion of Greater Syria, the Levant, which brought him into direct, open conflict with his nominal master, the Ottoman Sultan. His forces, led by his brilliant son Ibrahim Pasha, stunned the world by defeating Ottoman armies repeatedly and marching deep into Anatolia, threatening Istanbul itself. This was the moment Mohamed Ali ceased being a mere provincial governor and became a major regional power player threatening the established order. His expansion wasn't just about land. It was about securing strategic depth, resources, and proving the superiority of his modern Egyptian state model. The speed and success of his conquests sent shockwaves through the capitals of Europe, who began to view him with a mixture of admiration and deep alarm. He was carving out a new Egyptian empire from the decaying body of the Ottoman state, a reality that the great powers could not ignore for long. His ambition seemed limitless, but he was about to collide with the hard reality of 19th-century international geopolitics. The rapid rise of Mohamed Ali and his near defeat of the Ottoman Empire terrified the European powers, particularly Britain, who feared instability in the region. They could not allow a strong, independent, and aggressively modernizing power to control the vital trade routes connecting Europe to Asia. In 1840, the great powers intervened decisively, signing the Treaty of London, which issued an ultimatum to Mohamed Ali to withdraw from his conquered territories. When he hesitated, a combined British and Austrian naval fleet bombarded the Egyptian coast, destroying his power base and forcing his hand. He was forced to abandon his dreams of empire in Syria and Crete, withdrawing his victorious armies back within the borders of Egypt. Crucially, the treaty also forced him to dismantle much of his beloved monopoly economy and reduce the size of his army, crippling his power. It was a bitter lesson in realpolitik. No matter how brilliant or powerful a local ruler might be, there was a hard ceiling imposed by the global powers. In exchange for his submission, his family was granted the hereditary right to rule Egypt, securing his dynasty but shattering his personal dreams of grandeur. The Lion of Egypt had been caged, not by local rivals, but by the overwhelming combined weight of European imperialism. His project was not destroyed, but it was severely curtailed, ensuring Egypt would remain a dependent player in the international system for decades to come. In his final years, the immense strain of a lifetime of constant warfare, political scheming, and absolute rule began to take a severe toll on his mind and body. His incredible mental sharpness started to fade into paranoia and confusion, a tragic end for a man whose entire life was defined by cold calculation. As his capacity to govern deteriorated, power effectively transitioned to his capable son Ibrahim Pasha, and later to his grandson Abbas, while he remained a figurehead. The man who had dominated the stage of history with thunder and blood began to slowly and quietly fade into the background of his own palace. He died in Alexandria in 1849, a relatively quiet end for a colossal figure whose life had been a continuous storm of violence and ambition. It was the end of a man who had lived almost entirely by the logic of the mind, rarely allowing emotion to interfere with his strategic goals. His passing marked the definitive end of the founding era, leaving his successors to manage the complex and often troubled machine he had built. Even in his decline, his shadow loomed large over Egypt, as the state he created was entirely molded in his own formidable image. He passed away having achieved the impossible, transforming a chaotic Ottoman province into a hereditary kingdom for his family and a regional power. The final chapter of his life was a slow quietus, a stark contrast to the explosive energy that had defined his 50-year reign. When we step back and assess the immense legacy of Mohamed Ali Pasha, we are confronted with a deeply complex and uncomfortable balance sheet of history. He undeniably laid the physical and administrative foundations of the modern Egyptian state, dragging the country kicking and screaming out of the medieval era. Yet every canal dug, every factory built, and every school opened was achieved through the imposition of an absolute, often brutal, iron-fisted tyranny. He was a builder of great institutions, an army, a bureaucracy, an economy, but he was absolutely not a builder of human freedom or individual rights. Egypt was modernized, but it was modernized for the sole purpose of serving the ambitions of its ruler, not for the inherent benefit of its people. His story forces us to confront the dark reality that sometimes historical progress is achieved not through enlightenment, but through ruthless coercion. He destroyed the old feudal chaos of the Mamluks, only to replace it with a more efficient, centralized, and inescapable form of state control. He was neither a pure hero nor a simple villain. He was a historical force, a man who bent reality to his will regardless of the human cost. As we look at modern Egypt today, we still see the clear DNA of Mohamed Ali's project in its centralized state and powerful military role. And so, we are left with the final, difficult question that his life poses to us across the centuries. Does true national renaissance require a brilliant, ruthless despot, or can it be achieved by an awakened, free people? If you found this deep dive into the complex history of Mohamed Ali Pasha insightful, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell icon so you never miss our future historical documentaries. These videos take a tremendous amount of research and effort to produce, so if you appreciate this kind of content, Dropping a like and sharing it with fellow history lovers really helps us grow. We are very interested to hear your perspective on the final question we posed, so please leave a comment below and let us know. Do you see Muhammad Ali as the hero of modern Egypt or its first modern dictator?